I'm sure you've heard of Palworld, the indie game that has taken both the indie scene and the gaming industry by storm worldwide. A more mature parody of Pokemon that borrows elements from games like Fortnite, Ark, and Zelda Breath of the Wild. It's also the subject of a lawsuit between maker Pocket Pair and Nintendo, because Nintendo can't stand the idea of competition with their IPs. Just recently, I discovered an article on Steam, of all places, about Palworld's development, and you might be surprised about what I've read. It's one of the most unorthodox and unusual development stories of any game I've ever heard, and it's very fascinating. And of course, it's called Pocket Pair's Note on the company / Palworld and how they got here. And I think you might be surprised. This blog post comes straight from Pocket Pair themselves on a Japanese blog posting site called note.com. And as you could probably imagine, that post is all in Japanese. But someone actually took it and translated it into English, and it's pretty lengthy, but it's definitely a very fascinating. Here it goes, the Steam blog post. Someone leaked a really interesting post from the developer in one of the other threads, but I thought it would be great to discuss it on its own. Since it ties into a lot of people's questions and concerns, it also explains why it is so different compared to Craftopia. It's a crazy long post in Japanese, browser saying 49 pages printed, but the spacing is pretty large. It's an in-depth look, self-reflection of the Pocket Pair and development of Palworld. Pocket Pair is not a normal company. Google translates this into not a legitimate company, lol. Shows how close these things are in Japanese. Basically, it's a game company made by people who just loved games so much that they decided they wanted to make it themselves, even though they had no idea how. They didn't manage Palworld's budget. It was barely completed. It cost about 1 billion yen, 6.7 million US dollars as of today, or maybe a little higher as I'm reading this. They didn't know where to go for someone skilled in making FPS animations in Japan, since they didn't want a language barrier during development. So they ended up finding on Twitter a 20-year-old convenience store part-timer with zero experience in game development who was obsessed with animating the reload actions of guns. He ended up becoming a full-time member of the team working on multiple parts of Palworld. They switched from Unity to Unreal Engine 4 right after they finished the first trailer. Since they hired a new top-level engineer who reached out because he liked Over Dungeon and Craftopia, none of their current team or other hires had experience in Unreal. And most of the stuff they had used previously had been assets on Unity, so they had to start from scratch. They didn't realize that because they wanted 100 plus monsters, that they would have to make 100 plus 3D models, each with 20 plus animations. As they had no one on the team with experience making 3D models, they had always bought assets before. Miraculously, an experienced motion designer reached out through an HR company. He had also liked Craftopia and basically got it done. All we have to do is to release the game or go into debt before the bank account is zero and the company goes bankrupt. They went from a team of 10 to 50, plus a lot of freelancers. They thought it would be 1 year of development, ended up being 3 years. A newly graduated character designer that was turned down by 100 companies, including Pocket Pair initially, eventually came back and reapplied, and ended up drawing the majority of the characters in Palworld. He discusses the current state of the gaming industry, where developers are playing it safe, but therefore there is a limit to the potential of the game. For companies big or small, just finishing the development of a game is an accomplishment. However, the big companies end up putting out passively interesting games by not challenging themselves and not taking risks. Pocket Pair did not play it safe. They spent all the money, got extremely lucky with their hires, and they made a game that they believe is hella fun. He also mentions how they know they'll be written off as a ripoff of a bunch of other games, but makes a few points comparing it to the closest comparable, Ark. For anyone who's played them, the difference is clear, so I won't translate. PAL is a very interesting game, but I would like to add one point. It is not really for players who prefer story-focused single-player games. So please be aware of that. In total, it's a miracle this game was made